Hey, do you guys see that?
Guys, why is it coming right at us?
Oh my God. Go, run, run. Oh my God.
This is Stanley Premnath, an employee for Fuji Bank based on the 81st floor of the South Tower. Flight 175 had just made direct contact with his floor, and Stanley was still alive somehow. Everyone else on the 81st floor couldn't say the same. But Stanley was trapped under concrete and rubble, having no clue how he could possibly escape. Flight 175's impact into the South Tower mainly took place between the floors of 77 to 85. Out of the roughly 600 people on floor 81 and above at the time the plane struck the South Tower, only 4 ended up surviving. Here are their stories and how they pulled off the impossible.
It's 8:52 here in New York. I'm Bryant Gumbel. We understand that there has been a plane crash on the southern tip of Manhattan. You're looking at the World Trade Center. We understand that a plane has crashed into the World Trade Center.
When the North Tower was hit at 8:46 a.m., employees of Eurobrokers on the South Tower's 84th floor huddled around the TV in disbelief. Initial eyewitnesses and news reporters believed that a small plane, possibly a private jet or a commuter plane, had accidentally veered off course and crashed into the North Tower.
What the hell was that?
Sounded like a plane crash.
What is that? Somebody hit the World Trade Center or the...
It's a trade center.
The World Trade Center. There's a fire on the upper floors.
Was it a big plane?
It was like a 767, like a dual engine, American Airlines. I saw it.
American Airlines?
Did it come out when it went in, or did it just stay in?
No, I think it stayed in there. Look, that building's gonna collapse.
Those on the 84th floor did not realize that a second plane was just moments away from crashing into their own tower.
Is he descending for the building also? He's descending really quick too, yeah.
The plane's right wing sliced through the 84th floor, causing an immediate catastrophic explosion and fire. Many of the desks and cubicles were completely destroyed, and those who were in the direct path of the wing were instantly killed.
What's going through your mind when you see a plane, crash into the World Trade Center?
All I was thinking about at the time was I was worried about the people. You started seeing some really disturbing things.
What about rescue efforts? I would imagine there's still a number of people inside those buildings.
The impact destroyed stairwells and elevators above the 78th floor. This left anyone on the 84th floor with no way to escape. However, a man named Brian Clark on the 84th floor wasn't going to go down easy. Brian found himself as one of the few who could still move on the 84th floor. About a half dozen of those who were still able to walk immediately stumbled into Stairwell A. Stairwell A was the only stairwell in the South Tower that remained at least partially intact above the impact. Stairwells B and C were closer to where the plane made impact with the building, and this whole side was completely destroyed and engulfed in flames. As the small group of people made their way down Stairwell A, they reached a landing on the 81st floor and ran into another group that had survived the initial impact. This cluster of survivors were hurrying up the stairs, shouting that the stairs below them were blocked by a raging fire. This group believed that their only hope was making it onto the roof and awaiting a rescue from a helicopter. Brian's group now wasn't sure what to do. Without having much time to think, most of Brian's colleagues agreed going to the roof was their only option. They followed the other cluster and began climbing back up Stairwell A, heading towards the top floor. But at that moment, Brian heard something else. He heard a faint cry coming from the 81st floor. Somebody was yelling, "Help! Help me! I'm buried! Is anybody there?" Brian decided to follow this voice into the smoke-filled floor, joined by just one other coworker, DiFrancesco. The air was even more suffocating down here, as it was right at the heart of the plane's impact. Yet, the two men kept moving towards whoever was yelling for their help. Eventually, Ron started panicking because of how thick the smoke was. Ron decided continuing any further would certainly lead to death, so he turned back and ran up Stairwell A to join the group from earlier. Brian pressed forward alone, using just a tiny flashlight to cut through the darkness. In the office space that was ripped apart from the crash, Brian found the man that was yelling for help buried in a pile of rubble. Stanley Premnath, an executive for Fuji Bank, was somehow still alive. The left wing of Flight 175 crashed through his office, stopping only just a few feet away from where he was crouched under his desk. Stanley was alive, but he was crushed under the rubble and separated from Brian by drywall. Brian initially urged Stanley to climb over the wall, but Stanley, who was injured and disoriented, was unable to do so. Although he couldn't climb over it, Stanley started punching and clawing at the drywall. He was able to create a small opening, and Brian could then see Stanley. Brian reached his arm in and yelled at Stanley to grab on. Miraculously, Brian was able to pull Stanley through the opening in the wall. Brian then put his arm around Stanley and said, "Come on, buddy, let's go home." They were now in this together, but they were still far from making it out alive. The two then stumbled back into stairwell A, barely able to breathe at this point. Once they got to the stairwell, Stanley wanted to go up and Brian wanted to find a way to go down. Brian argued with Stanley, saying that a roof rescue was going to be impossible and their only shot at survival was going to be making it down somehow. Stanley finally agreed, and down stairwell A they went. This stairwell was barely still intact, however, as they had to navigate around the destroyed walls, push through thick smoke, and climb over debris. They moved as quickly as they could, knowing that the building wasn't going to stand much longer. They were surrounded by the ominous groans of the building, signaling that its structure was weak. Once they finally made it below the impact zone, it was just then a race to keep descending. Along the way, they passed injured people, terrified workers, and some sitting down, unable to go any further. While the civilians were heading down to safety, Brian and Stanley passed many firefighters who were going up into the danger. The FDNY firefighters were climbing up one after one, carrying heavy gear, oxygen tanks, and hoses, determined to reach the upper floors. Stanley and Brian made the final push and stumbled into the lobby of the South Tower. The scene was almost unreal, where even down here, marble walls were shattered, glass doors were blown out, and there was debris covering the World Trade Center plaza. Firefighters and the NYPD were yelling at people to get out of the building and run as far away as possible. Stanley and Brian then made it out onto Church Street and began running for their lives. But back up above the impact zone, panic was setting in. Rough estimates was that there was 600 to 700 people at or above the impact zone, from floors ranging between 77 to 110 in the South Tower. Most people on these floors gathered in conference rooms or near windows on the floors above the crash. Some were waving jackets and shining flashlights out the building, praying that helicopters would come rescue them. Others were making calls to loved ones and 911, explaining the situation. Everyone up here felt effectively trapped, knowing the stairwells were likely completely destroyed. Many thought they should just stay in place and wait for help, but an IT manager named Richard Fern had just about the exact opposite idea. But before we get into Richard's story, I need to take a moment to tell you about the sponsor of today's video, PLAUD AI. Oftentimes with this channel, I'll interview people for well over an hour and end up with transcripts that are pages and pages long. And I know I'm not the only one. In client meetings, team calls, and even college lectures, we've all walked away drowning in notes. That's where this AI-powered meeting assistant called PLAUD comes in. It can record up to 30 hours non-stop, and unlike your phone, you don't have to worry about the battery draining, storage panic, or call interruptions. After a recent call I had PLAUD Note Pro generate a full transcript with speaker labels, come up with the main themes we talked about, and had it write down specific details and examples within these different themes. You can customize how these notes look though, where you could ask PLAUD to come up with a summary, to-do lists for the whole team, and even an analysis of everyone's perspectives. I have to say my favorite feature of PLAUD though is the Ask PLAUD feature, which is like having a second brain for my work. I can literally ask it to brainstorm new video ideas with me, draft a new script for my video, or even search back through calls like what did a client say 3 weeks ago about the budget. When I started using PLAUD, I was worried about my privacy, but I learned that PLAUD protects your own data with end-to-end encryption and uses AWS cloud services. It's designed to help me, not sell my data. By using my code UNCOVERING, you'll get 20% off a PLAUD product today. After the first plane hit, the intercom at the building was trying to assure everyone that they were all gonna be okay. Richard had the gut feeling that he needed to get out though. He headed towards the elevator and pressed down. Right as Richard stepped into the elevator on the 84th floor, it was at this exact moment that Flight 175 hit the South Tower. The elevator car shook violently and lights went out. Richard got thrown to his hands and knees and knew exactly what had just happened. If the doors had already closed, he would have been trapped and therefore dead, but luckily they had not. Richard hurried out of the elevator and ran immediately to stairwell A. Richard opened the door on the 84th floor and looked down into the stairwell. It was smoky and dark, but he didn't think it was bad enough to where you wouldn't want to go down. Richard had to rely on his memory to get down the stairs, as well as a thin glow-in-the-dark stripe that ran along the steps in order to guide him down the stairwell. The most critical test came once Richard made it to the 78th floor. When he reached this floor, his heart sank. A heavy concrete wall, knocked loose by the impact, had fallen and completely blocked off the stairwell. Two other people were also standing there, feeling lost as to what they should do. Richard, without saying anything, lifted his hands under the massive slab, and with a surge of adrenaline, he lifted the concrete wall. The wall came up just enough to rest on the banister, creating a small opening barely large enough for someone to crawl through. Richard, followed by the two others, squeezed under the wall and continued downwards. Floor after floor, Richard continued down, passing by many firefighters who were only heading up. As he got closer to the ground, the horror of the day became even more clear. He saw injured people, some with severe burns, being carried down the stairs. Richard was fortunate enough to make it out of the lobby though and started running for his life. Richard was known as only one of 4 people to survive from the 81st floor or above. Even though Richard made it out alive with just moments to spare, the very last survivor was truly just seconds away from his death. Back up on the 91st floor, DiFrancesco and his group were moving up stairwell A. They were hoping to reach the rooftop and wave down a helicopter from there. Ron was the one who originally left Brian Clark as Brian was trying to reach Stanley Premnath. As Ron and his group made it to the 91st floor, Ron started having doubts about whether a rooftop rescue would even be possible. He remembered not seeing any helicopters coming to rescue people on the North Tower and realized that it would likely be impossible on the South Tower too, with the insane amount of smoke. He had an intense feeling of regret and a sudden powerful thought of his wife and children. At that moment, he knew he had to turn back. Ron began his lonely and terrifying descent. He had no idea what was below. He was just hoping that the group's warning from earlier was wrong. The air was becoming hotter and was filled with a sickening smell of burning jet fuel. He had to rely on his sense of touch and limited vision, using the light from his cell phone screen to see just a few feet in front of him. As he approached the impact floors, which was from 84th to 75th, he could hear the constant groaning of the building and the terrifying pops of the glass panes that were exploding under pressure. The fire was also roaring. When he got to the 82nd and 81st floors, the damage was catastrophic. The stairwell wasn't completely destroyed, but it was filled with the debris from the collapsed ceilings of the office. He had to climb over chunks of concrete and twisted metal. He also had to pass through floors in the impact zone that were engulfed in flames. He later recalled seeing orange flames coming through the cracks in the doors and hearing screams of people trapped on the floors that he was passing. His clothes were singed from the fire and he was getting burns all across his body. His contacts even melted into his eyes. Despite the nearly impossible odds, Ron made it past floor 75 and was now below the impact zone, but badly injured. The smoke was still strong, but his adrenaline was now insanely high, knowing that he had a shot at making it out alive. As Ron continued down the stairs, he passed firefighters courageously making their way upwards. Against all odds, Ron made it to the ground floor lobby. The journey had taken 10 to 15 minutes, but he later described it as feeling like an eternity. The lobby was chaotic, with emergency responders and people shouting for him to evacuate. Ron, with his body running on pure adrenaline, managed to stumble out of the building and onto Church Street. He had barely made it out onto the street when the unthinkable happened.
Take two. Take two and 2, 1. This is as close as we can get to the base of the World Trade Center. You can see the firemen assembled here, the police officers, FBI agents, and you can see the two towers. A huge explosion now raining debris on all of us. We better get out of the way.
The entire street engulfed into a massive cloud of dust and debris. The noise was also deafening. Ron got slammed to the ground by falling debris, getting hit in the back of the head. He had lost consciousness, but the last thing he remembered was seeing the massive cloud of gray dust rolling over him. Ronald DiFrancesco woke up days later in the hospital with severe burns, a head injury, and multiple broken bones, but he was somehow still alive. He had turned back on the 91st floor, went down a stairwell that others were saying was completely blocked, and became the last known survivor to make it out of the South Tower. While many articles and videos refer to there being 4 people who escaped the South Tower at or above the impact zone, other publications say that there was closer to 18 people. Some survivors have chosen to remain private, and others were misreported in the media. In some cases, people who were thought to have survived actually unfortunately passed away. The 9/11 Commission reports say that there was 14 survivors in the South Tower at or above the impact zone, but again, this number is extremely difficult to verify. These 4 survivors from the South Tower prove that even in the darkest of moments, humanity can still rise above chaos.